Welcome to the Red Path. Hello and welcome back to the Red Path. Today marks the start of a lore series I'm going to begin. We're going to be focusing on Kharn and his various battles against notable figures in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. I thought I'd start off against Sigismund of the Imperial Fists and later Black Templars, as it is one of the better fights written about Kharn and possibly one of the best short fights in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Honestly, the Sigismund versus Abaddon is possibly one of the best, but this one's pretty good as well. It details a sparring match between Kharn and Sigismund. Sigismund is actually remembering it as he's fighting traitors in the short story Templar, written by John French. So let's get into it, and stick around afterwards as I'll offer my thoughts on the short story. Okay, enjoy. The dueling cages aboard the Conqueror, 995 M30. Kharn grinned as the sword sliced toward his ribs. He was still grinning as he lashed the phalanx blade towards Sigismund's throat. The blow was fast enough that a human would barely have seen it, but Sigismund was already stepping back and slicing downwards. The World Eater caught the descending strike between his paired blades, scissoring past the sword and slashed out again. Sigismund met the cut with the flat of his sword, point down, guard high. Kharn's blade slid past. Sigismund flicked his sword over and cut back. Kharn froze. Sigismund watched the vein in the side of the World Eater's neck beat once against the sword edge. A thick worm of blood crawled across the polished plasteel, clotting even as it ran down his bared chest. Kharn snarled. The muscles of his neck bunched against the sword. The flesh around his eyes was twitching, and he was breathing hard, though not from fatigue. Sigismund raised an eyebrow. Kharn spat, reversed his grip on his twin blades and turned away. Beneath the waist he wore simple black trews tied with a length of rope. Sigismund whipped his sword blade through the air, blood drops shaking from it to scatter on the sand-covered floor. In contrast, he wore a simple robe of white crossed with black, cut so the flesh of his arms was bare to the dull light. Armour was customary for the fighting pits of the World Eaters, but not in this case. Not between these two. The curved walls of the pit were raw iron, marked by gouges from weapons and dappled with dried blood. Sigismund sniffed as he lifted his gaze to the rank tiers above the lip of the pit. Silence and emptiness stared back at him. He looked to where Kharn hung his paired blades from a weapon rack. The World Eater's breath was still ragged, his scalp still twitching around the metal of his aggression implants, his butcher's nails. Again? Asked Sigismund. Kharn's hands moved over the weapons on the rack, touching the haft of a long chain axe, lingering on the coils of a meteor hammer. But he picked out a sword, the blade as wide as his arm. Golden wings spread above the quillons to form a crossguard, and a single ruby blood drop looked out from between their pinions. Kharn tossed it from hand to hand as a human might with a knife, weighing it, judging it. "I'm always surprised that you like it here," he murmured. "I don't. Yet, here we are again." Kharn let the weapon rest in his grip. He frowned down at the long blade and shook his head. Then he returned to the rack and slotted the sword back into place. Sigismund watched the World Eater pick up each weapon in turn. He waited. He knew why Kharn did this, and he knew that it was nothing to do with which weapon the World Eater eventually chose. He appreciated the reason, even though the two of them had never spoken of it. At last Kharn gripped the handle of an axe that was more cleaver than war weapon. He rolled his shoulders, muscles flowing smooth under skin. The twitching in his face faded to almost nothing, his breath barely a murmur between his teeth. Sigismund held his sword low, its point almost touching the sand. The chains around his wrist clinked as he settled into stillness. Kharn's eyes flicked up to the plasteel links. He grinned, the light dancing in his eyes. "Imitation is flattery, I suppose," he said with a grin. "What was it that Jubal did?" "He cut them." "Ha! I always liked him." Sigismund paused for a moment. "He asked if I was afraid of dropping my sword." "Are you?" "No. He said the chains were like a prison." Kharn's grin drained from his face. The skin of his scalp twitched around the nails again, and a shiver ran through him. "Shall we carry on with this foolishness?" Sigismund nodded, and a thunderclash of steel replaced the silence. Once again, they were two figures whirling and striking at one another. Kharn's axe rang against the sword, swept away and lashed back again. He was breathing hard. Spittle foamed at the corner of his mouth. His eyes were wide, the pupils black wounds in bloodshot white. Sigismund took one step backwards, deflecting each blow as it came. Kharn pulled away, growled, and hammered in again. Sigismund parried lightly, and the axe whistled past his shoulder. He slammed the pommel of his sword into Kharn's forearm, and then at his face. The World Eater ducked and came up and crashed his skull into Sigismund's forehead. The headbutt slammed home, but even as it did, Sigismund dropped and turned. Kharn's wrist caught between his sword hilt and arm. Kharn's momentum flipped him over and into the air. He twisted as he fell and landed on his feet, tensing to lunge back. Sigismund nudged the sword tip against the back of Kharn's neck. Kharn bared his teeth. He was trembling, face twitching. He took a long, slow breath and then nodded once. Sigismund raised his sword. Blood clotted on his face. A deep gash marked the cheek under his left eye, and his nose was a mashed ruin. "Now at least it looks like you've been fighting," said Kharn. "That was a foolish move. You committed too much. I heard it worked for that bastard Sevatar. Besides, it is our way. When we are losing, we make sure the other side bleeds more than us. You are holding back. You always do." Kharn shook his head, face still twitching, and gestured at the circle of sand beneath their feet. "No, brother. I'm just not very good at this. I've stood with you in battle, Kharn. I've seen how you fight. Or have you forgotten? I have not forgotten. But this is not a battlefield. Your brothers fight here as though it is. No, they do not, and neither do you. True war is not control, brother. It is not bound by a fighting pit's walls. It is the whirl of chance and fury. When there is nothing for you to cling on to, you fight because you must, because certainty drives you. Without that, what would you be?" Sigismund stiffened. "I will forgive the implication of your words, brother." Kharn shrugged, though there was a brittle edge to his voice. "Always so sure, always so much control, even in anger. But if the pillars of your world shook, if duty took you down a path where nothing was certain..." Kharn reached up and ran his hand over the butcher's nails bonded to his skull. "What then?" "I would be nothing," said Sigismund. "I will forgive the implication of your words, brother, and I don't think you would be nothing without your chains of certainty. I think that then I truly would not want to face you, even here. No? No. Because then I really would have to try and kill you." So I really enjoyed that short memory that Sigismund has in Templar. If you've read Betrayer by Erendemski-Bowden, you'll remember that at some point in it they refer to Sigismund being one of the best combatants in the fighting pits, and this is obviously a retelling of at least one of those fights. One of my favourite parts of this is where Kharn is seen to be almost dallying over which weapon to choose, and there is a note about Sigismund appreciates it. Whilst it's not confirmed, this pretty obviously is Kharn trying to calm himself down. They've mentioned several times about the butcher's nails and how it spikes his adrenaline and how he's obviously getting angrier through the minute or so of fighting that they actually perform. But at the midpoint of the battle, when he changes weapons after Sigismund's drawn first blood, he chooses 2 or 3 weapons, just possibly meditating or calming himself, showing respect for Sigismund. Whilst they obviously don't have a friendship like Kharn had with Argel Tau, there's respect there. They recognise each other as equals on the battlefield, if not in philosophy. But just that little note about Sigismund noticing Kharn pausing himself and appreciating it, it just adds some real character to the story. And then of course at the end there's that little bit of one-upmanship between the two of them. You can't really tell whether Sigismund thinks he could beat Kharn in a true battle. He implies that he could, but also implies that Kharn might be too savage for him. However, near the end of the first wall, one of the Siege of Terror books, we do get another showdown between Kharn and Sigismund, and it's obviously far more furious than this sparring match. It is an interesting little battle. It's very short. It's a very cool moment for the World Eater captain, but it does not quite answer the question, as by this point Kharn has started to truly become the chosen of Khorne, so has some extra powers, I guess you'd say, at least as implied in the book. And Sigismund is fairly, he's been battling for quite a while, so he's pretty weak at this point. Anyway, so this wraps up the first episode of Kharn Versus. I'm not sure who I'm going to do next, but there is a long list of available literature. So the way this will work is I will read the excerpt and then I will give my short thoughts on it, and we'll just keep it short and sweet. Alright, well, thanks for listening and have a good one.